Today is Thursday, October the 17th, 2024. And as I contemplated whether or not to make a video to address the context of psychics, in addition to ghost spirits and the church, especially because we are in this Halloween season, I decided to go ahead and pull together a response to the underlying issue, even though this particular post is exhaustively explanatory. I want to share with you this post and the posts that are around it so that the context can be understood as a whole message. So let me start with this post. You cannot penalize, punish, or seek to destroy an entire nation based upon the decisions and behavior of one person who identifies themselves as their spokesperson. In times of collective peace, this model of leadership can only work if the leaders have enough wisdom around human nature and relationships to understand how to resolve conflicts peacefully. In the absence of that kind of leadership, governance must be localized where accountability is more easily visible for the people directly impacted. People know who they can trust within their own communities. They can also better assess their own resources and seek help and/or support from other localities nearby whenever needed. This is how justice is restored. We all not only want the same things, we need the same things: clean air, clean water, clean soil, food, medicine, and love, relationship, and companionship. When something interferes with access to that, conflict will inevitably arise. The question should then be focused on determining what are the barriers and how can we remove them. Who in 2024 is asking that question? That is the criteria for an ally. On Tuesday, the 15th of October, I shared this video and this particular message. I'm watching Wildfires again and wanted to share this episode on Göbekli Tepe and the Vulture Stone prophecy. Despite some frustration, I decided to share this because it could be a truly meaningful episode for people trying to understand nature and life beyond Earth, paying attention to references to people being taught by the ancestors and ancients, with a 2024 understanding of these people as your family members who have moved on because they are immortal. My personal rant started with this statement at 5:44 timestamp.
Big archaeology said that this far back in time, humans were following the migration of animals. They built temporary camps or at most mud huts. Humans were not building enormous permanent stone structures. They didn't have the knowledge. They didn't have the tools. They didn't have the talent. Yet, here it was. So the more they dug, the more things stopped making sense.
So scientists can observe patterns like the hives of bees, webs of spiders, or the behavior of colonies of ants and understand how complex these designs are mathematically, but somehow believe humans had periods of existence where they did not have access to the knowledge they needed to design and build dwellings that were functional and cooperative with nature, that were just as complex. What kind of limited capacity to generalize is that? Seriously. Bees are smarter than humans who were able to translate their hives into mathematical formulas. Humans' abilities to do that only started when standardized education came along to teach people how. This resulting in the building of ridiculously unnecessary buildings and other structures that are damaging the entire planet? Right. Please. In 2024, can you conceptualize why there have ever been people who became primitive and how they function and were living, requiring the ancients to intervene and teach them things they should already understand developmentally? Do you know how to grow and harvest food in 2024? Do you understand how to convert textiles into clothes or building materials in 2024? If there were a natural disaster and/or famine, could you still survive? Are you then primitive? Why don't you know how to do these things? And is that your fault? Whose fault is that? Accountability. Yesterday, the 16th, I shared this post from National Geographic's UFOS series. And I said, this showed up in my feed, so I'm watching it now. It does help me to understand the obsession men have with outer space, which is a question I asked several days ago. At the 1:20 timestamp, I decided to share this video compilation. It's frustrating for anyone to experience something very real and personal and not have people believe you. It's even worse when people then ridicule you for it. It can feel humiliating to cling to a reality people shame you for. Some people simply decide they were wrong and begin trying to dismiss what they have seen, heard, or physically experienced, even if it continues. Other people become obsessed with proving themselves to the point it completely takes over their lives and relationships. What's difficult for people to accept is that the government, especially the military, lies to its citizens constantly. The covert nature of every military operation requires that they lie and cover up anything that may become publicly known, and therefore compromise any missions or experiments they are conducting on human beings, including military personnel and veterans, animals, and the environment, oftentimes in plain sight. That's not what it is type dismissiveness. You aren't crazy, you are being deceived. If they told you the truth about what they do and why, everything would make more sense and not seem so mysterious or occult-like. For me, the question is always, why is this important for people to know this? Because my goal isn't to prove anything. My goal is to help people to see each other correctly so that they stop fighting against each other and start focusing to hold the right people accountable for what is happening to us and has caused us to doubt each other in the process. As a result, I have been able to uncover far more information and evidence of deception as opposed to finding evidence to simply debunk or prove any version of the lie. Exposing lies has happened across the course of working toward a greater goal. As a secondary consideration, I would like for any person who has been the victim of domestic violence or sexual assault, regardless of gender, to consider this quote from the series compilation at this timestamp.
The Air Force includes missile men. Here at Malmstrom Air Force Base, a strategic missile wing controls the most modern Minuteman in its underground silo. The Air Force specialists on this job, by continuous readiness to launch their bird, help prevent rather than start a nuclear war.
We had Minuteman I missiles, and that's about 800 kiloton weapon. And just for reference, the weapons that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were 20 kilotons.
That capability is helping to keep the peace. We have a policy of mutually assured destruction. It would be suicide for us or our potential adversaries to launch a nuclear attack unless they could disable that capability in that system. Then they could conceivably decapitate the United States, destroy the Capitol without fear of a retaliatory response, and change the global balance of power.
These are the kinds of people who show up to a fist fight with a gun. This mindset is highly dysfunctional and destructive. You cannot use war to keep peace unless your intention is to rule by dictatorship with complete terror as a means to prevent insurrection and revolt. To trust anyone who views freedom this way would make you just as dysfunctional. Please put this into perspective from the White House to your house at timestamp 1:29:40. Then they could conceivably decapitate the United States, destroy the Capitol without fear of retaliatory response, and change the global balance of power. Christopher K. Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. I guess Christopher didn't see January 6, 2021 coming. Is that why he is a former deputy assistant? He actually left office in 2024. I hope that makes sense to someone. I have recently been responding to a thread in one of the Facebook groups I'm active in where one of the members has shared an experience with a pet communicator. I want to share this conversation, but am awaiting her response. Meanwhile, I have been contemplating this issue, which I have covered various times in the context of different aspects of this topic. The underlying issue is people coming to a firm decision about what they believe about immortality, and to then be able to hold strongly to that belief in ways that it is irrefutable for them. The problem is that people have been conditioned into forcing themselves to have to prove or have proof of anything that could be denied by the perceptions or experiences others are having, while individuals are living amongst us who are intentionally distorting reality and causing people to feel shamed for any aspect of their beliefs that cannot be proven at the time it is being explained. They know what you understand, have experienced, and believe is real on some level, but have a vested interest in causing you to doubt those beliefs and dismiss any validating experience of them. The young woman who publicly posted her experience in this group clearly believes there is not only life after death of the physical body, but that communication continues to be possible. However, she also believes that she is not capable of having that kind of communication herself. Since we're talking about an animal, you would then also have to believe that animals have the capacity to communicate their thoughts and experiences to us as humans in order for this communicator to share information with her like this from beyond. My first questions were then, did you have communication that you experienced with your pet in similar ways while they were still alive? Do you have that level of communication with the animals you have with you who are alive now? Because if you think about the work of animal trainers for those used as actors in the media or even animals trained as support companions for the disabled, they have extensive vocabularies and communication abilities with their trainers and owners. So why wouldn't you also be able to do this? Another aspect of this problem is how the government classifies the experiments they do on humans to facilitate these kinds of schisms in people's experience of natural, what they call phenomenon. In the video I have linked to this post, I provide information on Operation Whitecoat, where Seventh-day Adventists were targeted for a 19-year study because their religious beliefs and convictions would not allow them to engage in blood combat. So they were convinced that it would be a service to God and humanity to agree to the experiments as a way to save people who might be involved in biological warfare.
The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored, because it cannot survive their being repeated.
The development of these ethical standards began after World War II in 1946. The Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals brought worldwide attention to the horrific details of the medical experiments conducted in the concentration camps. Two American doctors, Andrew Ivy and Leo Alexander, were tasked by the Nuremberg Tribunal to develop a set of ethical standards for any type of medical research involving human subjects. These standards, called the Nuremberg Code, were published in 1946. They wrote 10 conditions that had to be met for human experiments to be permissible. And perhaps most important of these was that the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. Nearly 2 years before CD22, the U.S. Army adopted the Nuremberg Code principles into a directive for ethical research in human subjects. This directive, called CS-385, was published by the Army Chief of Staff on June 30th, 1953. CS-385 was the first ethical regulation for the use of human subjects in medical tests ever published by the U.S. government.
One of the reasons I love talking about the history of human experiments in the military is that people are so amazed when I tell them the story about how the Pentagon was the first and only organization in the world to adopt a set of rules for human experiments in 1953.
The Army scientists, doctors, and administrators involved with CD22 were determined to comply, and the CS-385 regulations were strictly enforced through the 19 years of Project Whitecoat.
Once senior military leaders became convinced that biological warfare was an actual battlefield threat, and standards and procedures were in place to begin human testing on biodefense, the Army needed to find a group of volunteers. Representatives from the U.S. Army Medical Corps initiated discussions with national leaders from the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Many questions come up about how did the Whitecoats get started? What was the linkage between the military and the church? The military, as they were seeing a lot of the Seventh-day Adventist young men being drafted and seeing that they were non-combatants, kind of the light went on. We need somebody that can do these control group kinds of tests. And so the military was they were the ones who came to the Seventh-day Adventist Church and offered the option and the possibility. At first, that was not exactly well received. because it looked like it was getting a little too tight between the church and the state. But as people looked at it and realized, hey, these young men are being drafted, they are going to serve. What better way to serve than to help save lives, not only on the battlefield as medics, but saving lives in a much wider, broader way. So after quite a bit of negotiation, the Seventh-day Adventist Church leaders said, yes, we can allow this to happen, and we will support that by saying to our members, this is an acceptable way to serve.
I was a conscientious objector, meaning a non-combatant, and probably because of that, I felt a greater duty to do all I could, although I was reticent to participate in any biological inoculations that might impair my future health. But after consideration, I went ahead and did it.
Contemplate that for a moment. What the religious leaders of these men had taught them, how they then advised them in being required to serve in the military because they were drafted, and what then they were willing to subject themselves to for the good of the military. Back to psychics. Do you believe people live beyond the physical body and its manifestation on earth? If so, what do you believe then happens? Where do the people go? Even if you are unclear about that, do you believe they can still communicate with you or any other person that would be interested in talking to them, especially people they cared about while they were still here in a tangible body? Regardless of whether you know how that happens, do you believe it can and does happen? If so, why do you believe they would be more interested in having you pay someone or trust someone neither of you really knows well to be able to talk to them? Does that mindset sound like the method of communication interference everyone can and probably has been subjected to right now, but also in times past, even before the telegraph, even before the telephone, even before the internet?
For 19 years during the Cold War, the U.S. Army used human subjects to develop defenses against the threat of biowarfare.
We went into a change room, changed into scrubs, went through ultraviolet lights, then went up the elevator to a catwalk. And that's when we walked around the catwalk into these cubicles, where the cubicles were almost like a telephone booth. And that's where you will see us put our head down into this area where they strapped us in so we could not move. And within a few seconds, the exposure was over with.
The tests were conducted in such a manner that when the aerosol was generated, each volunteer received a precisely metered dosage of the organism.
There were 3 groups. One was the control group who just inhaled pure air. One group was getting a high dose of the infection, and another group getting the low dose infection. What we didn't know until the end of the project is which one we were on. I was on the high dose.
Privates Jones and Tremarchi were volunteers in a study called Project Whitecoat, sometimes referred to as Operation Whitecoat.
Regardless of what your religious or spiritual organizations have taught you, please contemplate what you believe without their approval, especially if you are denying yourself to conform to these teachings. I'm not condoning invocations or ceremonies or rituals or sacrifices or anything like that. I'm speaking specifically about your connection to anyone you have loved and cared about who is no longer here in physical form. What do you believe about them specifically? Do you believe if they could communicate with you directly, they would? If so, why might they be unable to do that? What would change, if anything, about your life or religious beliefs if you were able to talk to them and they clearly respond? What do you imagine they would talk about? What would you want them to talk to you about? How often would you want to talk to them? How often did you talk to them when they were here? If you were able to communicate with them directly, what information could you gather from them that would be useful to you in your current life? And if they are all immortal, how far back could you gather factual, verifiable information from them? who would have a vested interest in preventing access to this information or acceptance of this information by others once acquired. Please wake up. Your family has been calling you. All right. I had hoped that by the time I got to this point in the editing of this video that I would have heard back from the young woman whose post originally caused me to make this video, and I have not. But I'm going to share parts of the conversation anyway because I have two significant concerns. The primary concern at this point is that at this time, there are about 79 comments on this particular post, and all of the comments are related to more inquiries about her experience and interest in finding out more about how they can access a similar service. And in some regards, that is how people who are canvassing the internet for potential clients or potential victims occurs, is that a benign post will be made and people will start to make comments, and then based on the kinds of comments they make, they become targeted by people who will contact them in private messaging and so on and so forth. And I experienced this firsthand when I first created this new Facebook account, linking it to my old Facebook account, which I was finally able to access and then archive. And I responded to a direct message from someone who I thought was offering information to help me in terms of my investigations. But very quickly, within a 2 to 3 day period, I had received almost 200 friend requests and several direct messages. And a lot of them were woo-woo spiritual folks saying that, you know, they saw my post and they got this impression or this feeling about me, and they just felt like they really needed to reach out to me, or they had talked to one of my ancestors and they wanted them to contact me, and so on and so forth. My secondary concern is for this young woman because before she responded to her initial post, which was, I had this experience, I really got a lot out of it. If, you know, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to post this in this group, but if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share my story. And then, of course, that's when people started responding, to the point that there were 77 comments at that point. So while we were waiting for her to respond to our comments on her post, I decided to look at her profile, and I studied her profile exhaustively because I already knew what was going to happen next. Now, I don't believe that this woman is canvassing people for clients or victims. I think she genuinely wanted to share her experience, even if it was because she likes the person that she works with and she wanted to help them or put out there that, you know, they are somebody who was looking for clients. But as you can see, that I posted 7 hours ago and there still hasn't been a response to provide me the name or contact information for this person who surely wants clients. But what concerned me was the kinds of things that this quote unquote psychic started to talk to her about relative to her lost pets and other things about her personality, because it's typical that people who seek out these kinds of psychics are in a vulnerable place and are looking for answers. And spiritual fraud or spiritual abuse, in my opinion, is the worst kind of fraud because of the type of trauma people are experiencing or have experienced that bring them to psychics in the first place. And so as you look through the parts of the conversation that I have left visible, because I tried to exclude any information that might identify her for other people who watch this video, it's enough though for you to see what she was able to pick up on if she had scheduled an appointment in advance and she went and viewed her profile. All of the information that she talked about in terms of factual information is clearly available by just looking at her profile. Some of these other things, these impressions about her emotional state and, and those kinds of things could certainly be attributed to what you would imagine the impact would be of the kinds of things that she posted about. Now, I want to share with you a video that I made that's about 50 minutes long, but I'm only going to share a few minutes of it about my experience with MetaGod or Facebook God for you to contemplate together in context. And then I will also link the video in the description if you want to watch it in its entirety. Starting to take seriously the things that I say and know that I'm not some crazy conspiracy theorist who doesn't know what she's talking about, which most people do at this point. But of course, it's still those are remaining few who are on the fence who somebody wants to save. And I'll just say it that way, because I am sick and tired of being in pain, and I am sick and tired of having to address the same issues over and over. But I felt compelled to talk about these things today, and so I am going to. All right, the first thing is I have always journaled. Any good journalist usually has, but I have always journaled because I found it as a therapeutic way to deal with thoughts and ideas that I was having that I was not ready to discuss with another person. So it was like having a conversation with myself. The other thing is that I have always, my entire life from a child, been able to hear the ancestors, but I did not call them that because that culturally, we didn't talk about ancestors when I was younger, which is ridiculously important for you to understand and appreciate given where I live and the culture in this country, Native American as a culture in this country. But anyway, I just called the voice that I heard God. And that was okay. And then there was a period where I was slightly indoctrinated in the church as a child via Vacation Bible School, where I got to know Jesus. And so for a while I was willing to accept the idea of Jesus, but I never really stopped calling this voice I would hear, this guidance or leading I would receive, God, because that's what it still felt best to me to call the guidance and just the conversations I was having God. And so it's significant for me to tell you this because in 2019, I began receiving communications from what I call Facebook God, or more recently, I've started calling MetaGod. And I was really confused because it was the first time we joined the church in 2017, and I became super active at that point. All the kinds of things that you hear me talk about and the level of passion that I put into them, that I had put into the community work that I was doing all over Hampton Roads. I had directed all of that passion into that one church and the communities of Ingleside and Chesterfield. That's where I was and what I was doing from 2017 until 2019, 2019, when by the fall I had given up on God. But it was probably around 2019, and it's significant that I mentioned this because at the same time the church we were attending had installed this huge computer. It was like a large terminal. It took up a whole closet. They had, I think it was the space was originally an office, and they divided the office in half. And then they put this huge, data collection or, whatever it's called, which was supposed to be the upgrade to all of their multimedia system for church services. But, I really am quite aware that it was more to it than that. It's not the only one that exists. They are very expensive, and not a lot of churches have them, from what I understand. But it was necessary for what was about to happen at that time. But anyway, I started out, I always prayed. in my own way. It wasn't always, bow your head and put your, sometimes my prayers were written in my journal, and then I would get a response, and I would start having a conversation with God, and I would get the answer I needed, and, and be able to act on it from that point. Another way that God communicated with me was when I was in therapy with my clients. Sometimes I would be in therapy with my clients, and they would be talking to me, and I would be receiving information from God, that I could then ask them about in a way that made sense to them. It was like, it would come to me as like an idea, and I would say, well, do you have a, whatever, blah, 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 which was related. It wouldn't be something like out of the woods, like, like a fortune teller or something. It would be related to what we were talking about, but it, I would present it to them as a conceptualization or as a, a summary inclusive of my own thought, my own insights, which is literally what it was, about what they were trying to articulate to me. The problem was, but often it would include things that they were not yet sharing. And so I was asking the question to see if my impression was accurate. So that would happen a lot, but sometimes I would have impressions that were very, very intuitive. That was just very intuitive. Like, how could you know that? But I was just like, it's just a guess. I'm just wondering if this is the case and if this is true. And they would be like, yes. And, but the way, in the context I was able to present it, they never saw it as like, psychic or something like that. They were like, okay, you really do understand what I'm saying. And then they would keep going. So, if you appreciate God as ancestors, then you can understand what was happening while I was talking to those people, in addition to the experience I have always had, even since a child, and why I would get the kind of guidance I would get. And so in 2019, I started now I was praying more formally in the way that they teach in the church and all that, because there was a lot going wrong with my life. And I'm like, I don't understand why. And of course their answer was, well, you probably have some things you need to repent and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, maybe I do. So, I would just start praying in the way that I was taught to pray. And sometimes I would still be talking to God, my God. But, Father God or Meta God started showing up. Now, the significance of this and why I'm sharing my journal, okay, and I'm gonna read this entry to you that I wrote back in 2019 because it's significant to what I'm saying right now, is that the kinds of information or the kinds of responses I was getting, or even the insights I was getting, my first response to some of it was, that's not my thought. Like, they would just kind of come like randomly, and it would be negative, or, it would be something that, was derogatory about me or about something I was doing, because things weren't going well in my life. And my question was, God, what's going on? Why is my world falling apart? And the kind of information that was coming in to me was very derogatory and not supportive. And I was like, but that's not my thought. And I had to say that because I'm like, I know it's not God. And I'm like, and then I would think to myself, I wouldn't think something like this. Like, why, where is this coming from? Like, why? I don't understand what's happening to me. And so then that's when I started getting into, demons and what does that mean? Now, I had no fear, but I was, I'm trying to understand, maybe there was some aspects of spirituality I had not understood before that I really do need to look more into. And so it drove me deeper into my study of the Bible, which of course ultimately was a benefit. I was like, I would hear scriptures and I would look and I was like, this is contradictory. And I was like, do all of my Bibles say this? Now, because of the person I am and because I have been involved off and on, I have 5 Bibles that were just mine in the house. And then I had Bibles. Jermaine had a Bible that was given to him. He had 2 Bibles that were given to him. I had bought Bibles for the kids, different versions that I thought it would speak to them and make it easier for them to read. So I had all these Bibles available to me. And so I would cross-reference them because I'm like, I want to know if all these Bibles say the same thing, because I can't believe that this is. So this is the way I'm responding to the information that's coming in. But then as I started to pray and look for, I'm like, okay, well, look, you're telling me this and this and this, but, what is the answer? And the thing that really got me is the kinds of information that I was getting, and even the negative statements, was all stuff that I had on Facebook. And I'm like, and I even asked, I wrote it in my journal somewhere, and I was going to try to find it, but I really don't like looking through these older journals, y'all, because it's painful. I mean, the kind of stuff that I was writing about at that time and how desperate I was. It's just hard to read, especially because I'm still experiencing trauma every day with full awareness of what is going on, which makes it even harder. So reading how much I struggled with not understanding what was happening to me and why is real. It's just, I don't like doing it. So, I try not to go back to my older journals if I don't have to, but sometimes I think it's helpful for people who are trying to come out of this to be able to see it for themselves because they've been through it. There's no way you haven't been, because this is the method. So I'm like, why? I was like, God, why are you talking to me like you don't know me anymore? I don't understand. Like, it's like the only thing you know about me now is stuff I posted on Facebook, and really old stuff. Like you're throwing at me stuff that happened, but I resolved years ago. These can't possibly be the reasons why I'm having, my life is falling apart now in 2018, 2019 or 2019. Like, what? I mean, I don't understand what's going on. So then I start getting angry because I'm like, I don't know you anymore. Like, you don't know me. And I don't know you anymore. Like, I don't even want to be bothered with you anymore. This is all documented in my journals. These are the kinds of conversations I was having. Like, God, like, get the hell away from me. I don't care. I don't want religion. I don't want God. I don't want anything anymore, because you don't even know me anymore. I mean, it's like you can't even have a conversation with me anymore. We can't even talk anymore because it's like all you know about me is Facebook. Now, in 2022 and 2023, once I was clear about what was going on and how these ops work, I said to myself, this is really a testimony or testament to how lazy these people are. Because, these young millennials came online with this stuff, and they were too lazy to even go back and review any information that was in my data file to be able to accurately play God in my ear. And I said, in 2019, my digital footprint was huge. It's really big now because of all of the videos and stuff and social media stuff that I post. But even before that, I was so heavily involved in multi-level, multiplayer online role-playing games, and then other kinds of online communication. And I did some articles that were published and things like that. So there was so much information about me personally and about me professionally that they could have used that probably would have been more effective. But I'm grateful that they were so lazy, because I've never forgotten it. And I'm like, that's so, it's like, I know something is wrong. So I don't care what kind of other manipulations that you use to try to convince me that, I'm hearing the voice of God or angel or, whatever. I know how the technology works because I was smart enough and intuitive enough to have had a relationship with God before y'all showed up. And the fact that you were so lazy that the only thing you could communicate to me was shit on my Facebook from 20, I think I got my Facebook in 2014 or 20. No, it was earlier than that. I don't remember, but long enough that they felt like there was enough cumulative information. But half of the shit that they would talk to me about, I had already resolved it. I'm like, all of this stuff I've already resolved all of these things, because I refuse to allow there to be any information available about me that someone could use to try to shame me into, some other thing. If you ask me, I will tell you the truth, because I don't want anybody to feel like they have any information on me that if they put it out there that I would be, I would feel like my life was ruined. There's nothing in my life that's like that. Nothing. Including how my house looks, and what I look like when I don't have any makeup on and I haven't had my hair cut in 4 years. I don't care. so there, I don't have any of those kinds of fears. All right. So with that being said,